Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
The Stick and Pucksters took each other out in quali, so definitely no Sellies this week in Ferda, and Stroll looks like a massive chuckle fuck. Sainz fucked the dog this weekend after he just fucking sent it straight into the gravel. Nice moves with the fastest car there, bud. Max was chirping about his tires, but DNF'd because his GP2 engine can't go 50 clicks before it shits the bed. Vettel caused quite the kerfuffle when he ate shit after deking in turn 4. Russell's race was a real beauty, getting third in that Mercedes beater he has to drive. Hammy had his gitch in a twist, screaming Jesus Murphy because he got the "It's James" call to finish behind Georgie boy. Albon was on a Canuck in that Williams. I always knew he was a keener, but damn near looked like he was going to get dinged for not boxing. Then last minute we see him head her into the pits for some new runners with only one lap to go. And McLaren won't have to worry about eating KD and hot dogs next season because they look like they got their shit together. Perez didn't just go out for a rip today neither. He was fucking flying like a kid with ambition fleeing from the peg. At the end, Shaw wanted to give her tits, but his team told him to keep his stick on the ice and bring her home. But Buddy was like a kid on Christmas who just got a lacrosse stick. You know he wasn't waiting until the snow melts to stretch his legs, if you catch my drift. So this race was an absolute gong show for everyone who wasn't Charles.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
So right after the puck drop, Dusty Fuck Ricardo decided to put Sainz into the boards. The Red Bulls were skookum today, taking an easy 1-2. So right near the end of the race, Charles decided to gamble on some softs, but forgot that this is a Grand Prix and not just some vilts at the Legion, and ended up losing so badly he's probably not going to be able to pay his hydro bill next month. So third place once again was a beauty of a drive from a car that can't compete for the ship, but this time it was Norris in that car instead of Russell. Yeah, no, baby Shumi's wiping out too much to get that Ferrari seat. Ferrari knows it, which is why they signed Sainz. No, yeah, seriously, that kid's gonna have to pull off some miracle drives if he wants a red whip, especially with K-Mag able to give her tits every race. Alonso got ripped off so hard getting knocked out by Mick, I'm surprised he didn't pipe up about it later. Vettel is driving a boat this season, but luckily a boat's what you want in the wet, so Vettel filled his boots with all the points that car didn't deserve. Turns out neither Leclerc nor Perez could figure out how to hang a Roger and then a Larry, but it went a lot worse for the Francophone than the Latin lover. Toto Wolff has been given the Honorary Canadian Award for his apology over the radio to Hamilton. We know a good apology when we see one. This confirmed Hamilton is in the fall season of his career, and we'll see if he makes like a snowbird and leaves Mercedes this winter. Hamilton was screaming Jesus Murphy again, but this time his gotch was being twisted by Max's barn burner of a race, which saw him able to face wash Lewis. And no matter how sick a flow Lewis has, it can't hide the fact that George is lighting the lamp and Lewis isn't. In equal machinery. Nico Rosberg, despite the fact that he hasn't raced since 2016, was chirping Lewis the whole time thanks to his new commentary gig. Keep it up, Rosberg. Ocon got 5 seconds for an unsafe release, and your mom had you because I had an unsafe release when we hooked up behind the A&W after I had a sick lacrosse game.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
The Aston Martin fuel Chinook put Mr. Existential Crisis at the back of the grid, and for 20 glorious laps we got to see Vet climbing the order once again, right before Junior decided he needed to prove that he's a man and had a Donnybrook with his billet father. Max proved he's the bull as he cucked both Ferraris from behind. There's nothing Canadian about that sentence. I just wanted to say it. Let's try that again in Canadian. Max was just blasting clappers lap after lap and clapped Charles's cheeks as he crop dusted both Ferraris early in the race, and it took a safety car for Charles to even be able to smell Max's farts after that. There was a solid 2v2 scrap between Aston Martin and Haas, but you wouldn't know it because they didn't show it. That was some CBC levels of Bush League. Perez was passing bad gas about his engine, and Red Bull was all like, quit chirping, you chode, it's fine. Allons-y, Sid, allons-y to Gasly, and got 5 for fighting. Lando was looking like a Pantene Pro right before Gasly's whale shit of a turn put him into the boards. Somebody needed to tell Carlos Sainz's pit crew to pitter patter because they definitely did not get at her. And Russell was a fucking beautician today with that safety car pit stop. He also kept trying to big time Lewis. Nice moves, big shoots. Bottas's racecraft was schmelt tears. He lost 2 positions right near the end of the race. Zhou Guanyu had to retire last night due to a technical issue, and your mom and I had to retire last night due to a technical issue with that thing that's the reason why she gets really upset if you go through her drawers.
Well, you've heard the other guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Mercedes finally got their shit together and things were looking good for the GOAT, but K-Mag backdoored him and Lewis showed his 10-ply when he got on the radio to be a full-on poopy pants, acting more traumatized than when he saw that King Cobra coil left in the washroom last year. Beauty school instructor Russell big leagued everyone once again, pulling off a bar-down podium, not to mention some impressive D with those back checks against Max, whose op-shop DRS flap was also pulling for Russell. Chuck fucked the dog on a great day for Hay, with his race going the way of Leafs playoffs run thanks to his engine. After Pracky, Sainz was talking about needing to learn to play with the rear a little bit more, but his bussy got destroyed by a gust of wind. No idea what the fuck happened to Albon, but he got dunked on by Canadian Rocket Latifi. Pylon Ricardo showed a half-dead Norris is still more sandpaper than the Honey Badger. Everyone was speaking about the Green Bulls, but it turns out they're still shooting air balls, and Vettel is as far from a W as he is from being emotionally okay. Dude needs to just blaze up a cannon and chill. In other news, Valtteri Bottas has been made an honorary Winnipeg Blue Bomber for doing an incredible job for nearly the whole match, only to lose his boner right before the end. Lewis lit the lamp with fastest laps once he finally decided to just scoot. He was ripping one hell of a recovery drive right up till the end when the Mercedes boat anchor engine got the scoots and he had to give up fourth to Bussy Boy. Sergio Perez was none too pleased to be forced to give up the win just to give the apple to Max, especially when he had the pace and tires to deal with George's dirty dangles. Guess he should have done some better dickering when he was getting that Red Bull contract.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Can confirm it was a gong show of a weekend in Monaco, leaving Chuck E. Cheese as Ferrari robbed him of yet another easy W. The weather was reminiscent of BC being both unbearably rainy and unlivably hot. The Green Bulls showed no signs of improvement, proving once again that Aston Martin is spare parts. Alonso did everybody dirty with his sandbagging, managing his tires till he had 30 seconds of free track in front of him, and he still wasn't able to light the lamp for the fastest lap. Finally, at the end of the Grand Prix, Checo tried to selly, but his legs were jelly and he felly, which was real awkward because that's what happened to your mom last night after she was finished with my Grand Prix.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
So the Canucks finished the race at the back of the pack, as is tradition, but between us girls, they still finished ahead of the Ferraris. AlphaTauri surprised everyone today when they revealed they had Canada's greatest engineer on their pit wall. After fixing Tsunoda's wing with duct tape, the FIA rushed down to chirp at them to keep their sticks on the ice, but ultimately decided to let it go and Yuki was allowed to finish. As a Canadian, I've always pronounced Sainz's first name as Carlos, but I now understand why all the Europeans call him Carlos. Ferrari's Mattia Binotto's complete inability to put together a winning team despite having everything necessary for success has resulted in him being picked up by the Toronto Maple Leafs for next year. And finally, Ferrari fucked so many men today they've decided to rebrand as Your Mom.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Tabernacle the weekend. Oh, hey there, I just wanted to give all the F1 fans a big ol' welcome to Canada, and while you're here, why don't you pick up a bag of all-dressed chips or maybe try some Kraft peanut butter? A little word to the wise, though, if you're hoofing it somewhere and somebody calls out, "Hey, buddy," and that person isn't your buddy, it's time to book it. It was funny watching drivers posting about their travels to Montreal as if going to Canada was some exotic location. Then again, Quebec is basically an exotic location to the rest of Canada. The Quebecois got a few laughs this weekend after listening to Anglophones across the world butcher Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. Max Verstappen was unchallenged this weekend, winning from pole position. I was going to make a comparison between him and Oilers-era Gretzky, but I didn't feel like having a Donnybrook with every boomer who still insists that motorsports aren't real sports. Alonso demonstrated that he's out there Ferda, listening to team orders even though he big leagued Ocon by being 100 times faster even with straight line issues. Yuki needed to take about 20% off there, crashing at turn 1 with fresh tires. Any Canadian could have told him you gotta slow down and brake earlier when it's cold, but Winnipeggers jumped to his defense, saying that it should be fine to send it through any corner at full speed, regardless of conditions. There's a reason why Manitoba has to have public car insurance.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Oh, holy fuck, buddy, that race was so good, my balls are emptier than a duck pond in December. I'm still basking in that post-nut glow though, so I'm going to keep this short. There were more fights than a barn full of Leafs and Habs sweaters, so clearly the new regs are working. That race was so good, it's what I'm going to think of the next time I'm blowing your mom's back out and struggling to finish.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Well, fuck a duck. A little beaking between fan bases is nothing new to us Canucks. I mean, hell, we've been known to riot after a hockey team loses, but this sort of backwoods behavior seems to have finally made its way to Formula One, with reports of Austrian fans acting racist, sexist, and homophobic towards fans wearing the wrong colors. I mean, sure, a little bit of chin wagging is all in good fun as long as you're just flapping lips, but I think we were all surprised to hear just how far over the line it went, so I'm going to take this moment to remind all you Austrian fans to keep your stick on the ice. Red Green would not be proud of the way you're acting, and you're all this close to being uninvited to the Possum Lodge barbecue, so get your shit together. You don't need to gutty people just because they cheer for your favorite sports guy's rival. At the end of the day, we're just a bunch of peasants circle jerking about rich fucks who go zoom around a track, so chill out, spark a devil's dart, and don't concern yourself with which rich fuck the other peasants are cheering for. Give your balls a tug, tit fuckers. My god, that was boring. I've had a better time watching Canada Gooses migrate. Aside from the degens at Ferrari, not a whole lot happened. Lando finally got his freezies from Willie's white van and tried to big league his team, saying they don't deserve any. Give your balls a tug, bud. On hot days, everyone gets a freezie. Seb was clearly not worried about his future at Aston Martin and decided to scrap with Stroll at the end there, even bumping into him at one point. Mercedes got a double podium thanks to my boy Latifi, who was donking around and ended up taking K-Mag with him. But the thing we're all going to be feeding the ducks to later is Alonso's incredibly strong finish. And speaking of incredibly strong finishes, your mom still owes me for the seat cover she ruined when I went down on her in the parking lot behind the 24-hour Sal's.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Everyone who's been calling Latifi 10-ply was in for a bit of a shock this weekend when GoTV set the fastest lap in FP3 and then followed that up by doing a purple first sector in Q1. But despite the purple sector, Latifi still managed to qualify dead last, as is tradition. Sebastian Vettel left Aston Martin, which I'm sure caused some streaks on Daddy Stroll's Calvins, but before we had a chance to crush some Sandos, they signed Nando, begging us all to ask the question why he would sign with a spare parts team with Schmelz at the helm when he's been blasting clappers all season. Between us girls, I think it's because he's been scrapping with Safnauer, and sticking with Alpine would have been a suey career move. Sure, he won't have a toe-curling season next year, but at least he knows he won't be competing with Piastri for a seat, since it's clear Ocon's getting blowies in his contract.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Stefano's so-called Dominicali has been talking out of the side of his mouth these days more than Jean Chrétien, claiming that historical tracks are a part of our heritage, then turning around and axing them unless they cough up more dough. Buddy's so money-obsessed he probably fishes loonies out of his friends Chesterfields. This goof couldn't give a moose's testicle where they go racing as long as they're lining his pockets with old Lizzie. Spa isn't just historic, it also produces good racing, as we saw this weekend. That was a fucking barn burner. My guess as to why it stayed was he got tired of all the chirping. I mean, I would crop dust that chode if I saw him in the paddock. I don't care if it's just chin wagging, they need to stop acting like they're going to axe these tracks. You shouldn't gutty the fan base like that.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Well, Jesus, Murphy, that was a boring race. I mean, they're pretty early in the morning here in Canada on race weekend, so normally I get up around 8 o'clock, lie down on the Chesterfield with my cat Princess, and we watch the race, but honestly, I found myself getting lulled into a bit of a sleepy state here because it just seemed like the same old, same old. Every time I woke up to see if anything had changed, nope, still Max in the lead, but then one time, oh, what the hell happened here? Fucking Lewis is out in front with George behind him, and there was a little bit of excitement for a few laps, but then no. Mercedes dropped the ball, and some dirty dangles from Max on that safety car restart ended up with Lewis dropping back, and we're right back to watching Red Bull dominate with Max once again. Frankly, it feels like the regs have accomplished the opposite of what they were supposed to. They were supposed to bring the field together and give us some better racing, but all they've seemed to have done is change the top two teams from Mercedes and Red Bull to Red Bull and Ferrari, and Ferrari just clearly isn't ready to be competing for ships. At this point, I'm looking forward to the regs changing again, so we can stop watching cars that are bouncing all over the place, destroying their drivers' backs, while still having one guy just out front dominating. It seems like people look back on the eras of Hamilton and Schumi dominance with rose-colored glasses because they're pretty fucking boring to watch. I'll be honest, I'm not sure what's less exciting. This season after the summer break, or the half-hearted blowies your mom gives after I've already finished her off.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Cheering for Ferrari is like cheering for the Leafs. They can have the strongest lineup and still turn it into no results. It doesn't matter how much they hurt you, you continue to support them even as they burn you over and over again. I saw Charles on pole today and thought, no, don't do this. Don't give me hope. And sure enough, right until the end, they were always close enough that something happening could turn it into a Ferrari win. But of course that never happens. On the other hand, Red Bull, like the Habs, can give you every reason to cheer for them, and they're still somehow unappealing to support. Honestly, I think a lot of this boils down to the fan bases. Everybody teases Ferrari fans, but nobody hates them because they're always getting hurt by their own team. Further to that, they don't seem to be spewing the same kind of verbal diarrhea that Red Bull and Mercedes fans are constantly shitting out of their mouths. I personally don't support any one team. I love the whole sport, and my feeling towards individual drivers and teams can evolve. And I can find myself cheering for almost anyone at any point in time, but this whole toxic fandom shit needs to end. It doesn't matter what color sweater you're wearing. When we're in the barn, we're all fans of the same sport, so we need to just shut the fuck up about who we hate and focus on talking about who we love. Look in the comment sections of these videos. Whenever Max or Lewis comes up, There's so much chin-wagging in the comments section, it's honestly embarrassing. But whenever it's Charles, Carlos, Lando, or even Alonso that comes up, it seems like the beaking stops and we can actually have a civil discussion. The one lesson I want everyone to take away from this is don't support Ferrari or the Leafs. It doesn't matter how good or bad the fans are if the team sucks ass. The toxic fans aren't leaving you alone because they respect you. They're ignoring you because they don't see you as a threat.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Well, fuck a duck. Danny Rick was my boy today. Buddy went from P16 to P5 today, and I didn't hear a peep from the commentators about it. I know he's on his way out, and I know he's still finished behind Lando, but that's still a hell of a drive, and I think it warrants some credit. With the ship basically in Max and Red Bull's hands and 5 races left to go, our buddies in the booth need to start hyping up the midfield battles. If you stay focused on first when it's basically already been won, we lose out on time that could be used to focus on other battles that will go down to the wire, and frankly, that's the only spectacle that's left. Hell, when Mercedes and Lewis were running away with it every year, they had to make a freaking reality TV show to show people that there are interesting stories aside from the title fight.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Over here in Canuckistan, we're used to getting up early for races, but dusty fucks like myself are not accustomed to these late starts. There was a time when I'd rock up to a social after playing some midnight shinny, but nowadays staying up till 2 a.m. is a tall ask. Kudos to the FIA for trying to keep this gong show in order, but delays were inevitable and I conked out before it resumed. If I'm not drinking, fucking, or fighting, I'm going to bed. So they need to get their shit together and get some better wet tires, or fix the rooster tails and visibility issues. We should only experience wet delays the way we're used to, when we're edging your mom.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
A wise man once said Lance Stroll is a Canadian disgrace, and I just wanted to say that not only is that not true, it is not possible. For someone to be a disgrace to their country, people in that country need to know who they are, and nobody in Canada knows who Lance Stroll is because the only Canadians that know who Lance Stroll is are ones who watch Formula One. And aside from myself, there's got to be like maybe 50 other people in this country who watch the sport. F1 is completely unknown in Canada. I'll be honest, I bet you that more people play dodgeball in Canada than watch F1, and I would know because I used to do the commentary for competitive dodgeball, and we used to get literally dozens of viewers on every stream. Lance Stroll is a nobody in Canada, so it is not possible for him to be a national disgrace. But even with that being said, he is still the best racing driver this country has produced since Jacques Villeneuve. But at least Villeneuve waited until after he was world champion to pursue his illustrious career of being a disgrace to his country. It's such a shame that Latifi wasn't a better driver. At least he's a nice guy.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Jorpedo failed to deliver this weekend by driving a clean lap 1 and not putting anyone into the boards. Everyone bills Mexico as an exciting race because the thin air means that there's lower downforce and therefore less grip, which makes a more exciting race, kind of like when there's rain. But I think that they're just delirious from the thin air because what we just watched was an absolute snooze fest. We should all be kissing Pirelli's feet, thanking them for giving us literally the only thing to talk about during the race: tires. And it's clear without the different compounds and the ensuing tire strategy, there would have been literally nothing for the drivers to whine incessantly about. I'm serious, there was so much moaning on the radio, I thought somebody had mic'd up your mom.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
Well, Jorpedo was a frickin' rocket today, leading most of the race and taking it from pole to victory. But the real hero was Lewis. Lewis got frickin' body checked by Max, who was having a race-long tantrum and still managed to finish second behind his teammate. I have to hand it to Toto. He's pulled out all the stops to get his team back on track, even going so far as to get Lewis Brazilian citizenship just so that he could have that home race advantage. Mercedes is back up at the front, and we should all be grateful. Ferrari is a gong show, and Red Bull has Joffrey Baratheon as their lead driver.
Well, you've heard the British guys enough, so why don't you listen to somebody else for a change?
I went to a kegger last night, and today I had wicked barley gut. So the whole time I was watching the race, I was ripping wicked dingers that had a sulfury scent to them. Oh, God. I'm still ripping them. And that pretty much summarizes what the race was like. Hamilton and Alonso shit there depends. Paris crapped the bed, and Vettel's strategy was dog shit. All the old guys had races that ended up shittier than my Calvin's.